I looked at three things: information, transportation, and communication systems. Think about that since the late 70s and what our society has come to. When you look at those three ingredients to change, and now you look at information systems, and you look at communication systems, and you look at the way the majority of the population gets their news, again, from those same two players, Google and Facebook. This is a fundamental change that is altering everything about everything. And these two institutions want to be the gatekeepers of speech in the world. This is dangerous. This is extremely dangerous. In fact, I would say the amount of power these organizations represent now is, in fact, not just a monopoly power for economic reasons, but more fundamentally a monopoly power on information. And welcome back to Infowars.com. This is Nick Begich, and I'm filling in this last hour for Alex. And, just to pick up where the last guest, Mark, left off on climate change, a couple weeks ago, I did a segment on this, quite contrarian as well, regarding what's really going on with climate change. And take a look at some of those older segments. One good thing about Alex, one of the things I really appreciate about InfoWars is keeping that material alive under subtitles. So take a look at that, because there are some other issues that I think are also driving what we're seeing. But these are natural cycles predominantly. I think as time goes on and as people get honest with the science, we'll see a very different picture. Science has almost become religion, if you think about it. It's what does religion come from? Root words which mean to regulate and believe. Man, is science about that or not? I mean, these days it seems so much so. Political correct science, no room for it. And as it was said in the last segment, anytime there's been a major change, it has always started with a few that disagreed with the status quo. Science is no exception. I even think about continental drift, the whole idea of how geologic processes work. In the 1960s, this was so controversial, was thrown out. The guy was laughed out of every circle, and now it's mainstream. In fact, it's probably what's driving most of what we see in climate change, undersea volcanics, these kinds of issues, which I've covered in the past. But jumping into this segment, I want to give, again, a little bit of background on myself for those that haven't heard me before. I've been working with Alex since his very early days when he was in his 20s. We began working together, and I have taken always a bit of a contrarian view, and I appreciate disruptors, which is what I consider myself, what I consider Alex, and many of us in this fight for freedom. Freedom of the press, being able to express ourselves freely. In fact, many know my family background. My dad was a state senator, later a U.S. congressman. My brother, Mark, was a mayor, and then eventually a U.S. senator, running for governor now in Alaska. And my brother, Tom, is a seated state senator. I've run a couple of times, but I really decided this is a better role for me, addressing the issues I do care about in a public forum. But in my family, one of the highlights, one of the main emphasis was to think, to use your mind, combine it with your inner self, your soul, and push yourself into your passions. And in my family, we have a lot of debate, about politics. It goes from the ultra-liberal to the ultra-conservative in my family. When we get together at social events, and we just did this last weekend with my mom in town, we have some pretty lively debates. But when we part as family. And this is the model I believe the country needs right now. We need to recognize that in America, we are a family. We're a family of common interests, very different ideas about how to achieve those interests. But the respect that family brings is the same respect that we should expect from our fellow citizens. And now on the left, we see the violence. The idea of protesters, counter-protesters showing up in face masks, covered faces, hiding their identities. This is not discourse. This is not dialogue. This is just the opposite. What breeds contention, what breeds disaster in the long run. We're coming up into a break. Pay attention to the break. This is how the network supports itself. This is Dr. Nick Begich, and you're listening to InfoWars. And welcome back. This is Dr. Nick Begich, and I just want to mention one of the specials going on. It's called Winter Sun, 40% off on Winter Sun, and this is a vitamin D supplement. I want to mention, even though it says Winter Sun, we're still into the throes of summer. Most of us work in indoor environments. We don't get the sunlight that we need. Winter sun is important all the time. You can go and see D deficiencies across the spectrum in almost every community, whether you're living in Hawaii or whether you're living in Alaska. Right now we're in the peak of our sunlight cycle, but so many people today don't get out of the cubicle. Winter sun, utilize it, use it. This is one of the major deficiencies leading to all kinds of dysfunction. So check it out. Winter Sun, 40% off. Take a look and support this program by supporting the products that make this possible. Getting back into this idea of thinking again and discourse in terms of the public, for me, the search of truth began pretty early in age. And I can tell you, when I was growing up, here in Alaska, and then later moving to Washington, D.C. with my family when Dad was in the Congress. Because in those days, actually, families moved with congressmen. They didn't fly back and forth on the weekends. We were there. We were engaged. And, there was a very different culture because of that. Because, in fact, I spoke with my mother about this recently. Democrats and Republicans, they would get together in social events. They would involve our families, and it would keep us focused on what we were about. And there wasn't this division, this separation. It was really an integration of philosophies and ideas that led to vigorous debate, lots of conversation, and certainly with all the emotional energy that you would expect. But at the end of the day, respectfully, resulting in decent legislation that was put through the normal processes. Today, it's about resist, never concede a point. This is not the America I grew up in, and not the America we want for the next generation. The idea of thinking on your own and thinking outside of the box. My brother Tom once said to me, was reiterating a story. My brother, he thinks out of the box. Let me say this, and I said this to Tom. If you think there's a box, you're still in it. And it's the way you perceive the world, looking at information, taking information, and not just from mainstream media, because it has shifted dramatically. It is not freedom of the press intended to keep us informed anymore. What it's really intended to do is push public opinion in very specific directions. And this is a very dangerous place. When you think about Google and Facebook, 84% of all global ad revenue on the internet goes to just those two players. Let me say it again. 84% of all media advertising on the internet is to those two places, Google and Facebook. These are owned by liberals. Think about the biggest companies in the world, Apple Computer, essentially up until the founder's death, liberals. Gates, when you look at Bill Gates and his foundations, liberals. When you look at the biggest organizations that are driving media and public opinion, it's liberals. The dominance of these two players, Google and Facebook, needs to be addressed because they are a utility. The internet needs to be regulated like a utility in the sense of making sure all opinions are permitted. There should be no screening. Short of yelling fire in a movie theater, free speech is about expressing contradictory ideas and bringing out discussion. And hate speech, I mean, come on. What is hate speech? It has been with us since the dawn of man, if you want to give it a title. But what it is speech you don't agree with. That's essentially what it is. It's like a conspiracy. It's when two people get in a room and they're talking about something you don't agree with. You call it a conspiracy. This is not the kind of thing that leads to good public policy or the kinds of changes that all of us are looking for within government, which means transparency. A lot of my work over the last 25 years has been about privacy, the digital changes that are coming, and it goes all the way back to 40 years ago. And when I was in my late teens, my theme in those days, this is taking it back to the 70s, this was over 40 years ago, and I looked at three things: information, transportation, and communication systems. Think about that since the late 70s and what our society has come to. You know, when you look at those three ingredients to change, and now you look at information systems, and you look at communication systems, and you look at the way the majority of the population gets their news, again, from those same two players, Google and Facebook. This is a fundamental change that is altering everything about everything. And these two institutions want to be the gatekeepers of speech in the world. This is dangerous. This is extremely dangerous. In fact, I would say the amount of power these organizations represent now is, in fact, not just a monopoly power for economic reasons, but more fundamentally a monopoly power on information. When you look at the mainstream slide, because people don't believe the mainstream, it was much before anyone came up with the phrase fake news, for goodness sake. People didn't trust the media for a very, very long time. I mean, the only group held in a lower esteem was the U.S. Congress, right? With popularity ratings hovering below 10% even. And you know, when you start to think about the American public wants good information, wants accurate reporting, and we're just not getting it from the mainstream. Alternative media is the only media that's left alive, and they're trying to squash this. And where that leads me is into the current conversation. Going into these midterm elections, just 12 weeks away, we are seeing the shutdown, the manipulation of conservative voices by these two major media players. Fundamentally, they're going to have a bigger impact on what happens in these elections by withholding speech, by limiting free speech. This is a fundamental change, a big difference from where we were. You know, freedom of the press wasn't about just saying whatever you wanted. It was about invigorating the public debate. This is what is critical to the American way of life, is a public debate that's lively and emotional for sure, but also remains respectful. You know, when I look back on my own history, my biggest change and the biggest thing that impacted me in life was the disappearance of my father, who was on a plane flying from Anchorage to Juneau in the middle of a campaign, disappeared off the radar screens, and was lost with the majority leader of the U.S. House. Some of you remember this story. Hale Boggs was on board. This was weeks before elections, the second election of Richard Nixon, and a critical point in our history. That's when Watergate began. That's when all of the Pentagon papers were being released. I mean, huge disclosures were being made about the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower had warned against, that Kennedy was looking at when he was talking about secret societies in the deep state. All of these things were coming to a huge crescendo in our country, and major players were snuffed out at a time that most people needed the reassurance of this republic holding together. Today, we're seeing a repeat of the same kind of situations, only these elections are going to be the critical elections that shape democracy for the next decade. We have to pay attention. If the right doesn't stand up and recognize the left is the biggest barrier to free speech. Stay tuned. We're going to be back in a few moments. This is Dr. Nick Begich with InfoWars.
You know, President Trump talks about how we need to be trailblazers, how we need to be outsiders, how we need to expose the current stagnant system that's been suppressing us, wanting to make us poor so he can consolidate control and buy us up for pennies on the dollar. That really is the globalist system. And he's absolutely right. So it is an honor to be persecuted by the globalists, and to be lied about and to be demonized. But it's an honor to draw them out so we can show who they are, so that you take action and you take the country back politically, culturally, spiritually, financially. Another hero is Julian Assange, who's been in solitary confinement in a closet-sized room. They converted a closet with a bed and enough room for a laptop. They took that away over a year ago. No communication with the outside. It's all been one hell of a time for him, and he was very bipartisan in that he exposed Republicans, he exposed Democrats. He very judiciously released information that exposed criminal activity of the NSA, criminal activity of the CIA, illegal spying on Congress, illegal spying on Trump, illegal spying on me. But they had my home number, my old cell, my new cell, and my office line. And they had Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago private apartment number that I had. Total proof of Obama spying on Trump and yours truly a decade ago. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the real deal. And America's had freedom so long, people don't recognize real tyranny when it hits them right between the eyes. But everyone needs to go to Infowars.com. The article is right up there at the top of the page, red link. Petition to Trump, pardon Julian Assange. And we go over the fact that he engaged in regular journalistic activity and did a wonderful job being advised by top journalism professors around the world, and that he was very, very fair about what he did, and that you need to send the message that he's a hero. Now, I know they claim he's a Russian agent with no evidence and all the rest of that garbage, even though they've released stuff on Russia and Israel as well, and China. But it doesn't matter. It's the right thing to do. And you wouldn't have gotten elected without Drudge. You wouldn't have gotten elected without what you've done, obviously. You can't say it's any one person, but without any of us together, it wouldn't have happened. So we need the president to pardon Julian Assange. And you said in a speech, I don't care who got her illegal server. It's illegal. It's about what she did that's wrong. Don't change the subject. Go back to that instinct, sir. But you told Assange, release it. You said release more stuff. And he's in the crosshairs. And he needs to be pardoned if he's brought back to the United States. Look at that. Everybody else is just like yellow or clear. That's because it's been denatured, it's been watered down. We didn't do that. You think I would metaphysically sell you something that is the very best I can get? I'd rather go to hell than do that. I will only give you the maximum best info, the maximum truth, the maximum product, because I want that goodwill. What I do to you, I do to myself. Don't you get the big secret? You ever seen fish oil look like that? No, you never seen that, have you? And this little jewel right here is solid, liquid consciousness. Look it up. Find out how even the FDA and the government admits fish oil is incredible. The number one thing anybody can do for themselves is take good fish oil or krill oil. Just like our information is dynamite, so are our products, InfoWarsStore.com.